couldn't have everybody seated, but we're just really happy that all of you came. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. for coming down. It's quite the occasion. Let me just preface by saying that in January this year at the Kerala Literature Festival, we had the privilege of having France as our guest nation, and we had quite the amazing delegation of writers from France. And in some sense, this is an extension of this partnership that we forged in the last couple of years. I just want to also mention that, of course, French literature is nothing new for a Malayali. We've known classical works for decades at this point, but there's been a consistent effort from our side and publishers across Kerala to bring more contemporary authors from France in translation. There's books that are out in English, but there's equally a good amount of books out in Malayalam. We were very honored to have Gauze, who, a very good friend of mine from France, suggested that I should read. At the time I still can't read French, but I went with this one-page translation that she gave me. And I said, this might do very well for Kerala. And 2 years later, he ends up on the shortlist for the International Book Awards. But, we've had, there's Amin Malouf that we've published long ago, and there's another book by Amin Malouf for a guy going to do this year. So there's a lot of books that we have been doing from French to Malayalam, which has found a wonderful audience. So this is a manifestation of what we have been able to do over the years, to sort of dedicatedly put up a shelf for all the works from France for readers in Kerala, English and Malayalam. And this is one shelf here we have in Trivandrum, but we'll have a similar shelf out in Cochin and Calicut as our further expansion of this whole program. And we're really grateful to the French Institute, the French Embassy for supporting us on this matter. Once again, thank you all for coming here. It's going to be a great evening. I'll just hand over the mics to these two. There's an interesting conversation to embark.
Thank you, Mr. Govind GC, for the introduction to Pardon My French, a space where words transcend borders. Now it is my distinct honor to invite a diplomat whose commitment to Indo-French ties has been exemplary. A career diplomat with over 25 years of expertise in Asia, Thierry Mathou has held key diplomatic posts including Consul General in Shanghai and Ambassador to Myanmar, the Philippines and Thailand. He also served as Director for Asia and Oceania as France Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Alongside his diplomatic career, he has pursued academic research in Himalayan studies, dedicating more than 4 decades to deepening his understanding of India. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Thierry Mathou, Ambassador of France to India, for a brief address. Your Excellency, we are deeply grateful for your presence.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you. So let me first say a few words. Dear Dr. Shashi Tharoor, dear Ravi, distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here for this very special event where, as a matter of fact, at the beginning of this year, I had the pleasure to be invited by DC Books to attend the Kerala Literature Festival where France was the guest of honor. I must say that I was very impressed by this event. Culturally, it's probably the largest festival of its kind, not only in India but also in Asia. So we were very, very proud to be a part of this great event. So today, with the official opening of Pardon My French space in Trivandrum, our collaboration enters a new and exciting chapter with DC Books. Since its founding, DC Books has been committed to bringing world literature to the readers in Kerala. By joining this initiative, DC Books continues to uphold its vision. So thanks a lot. To celebrate this special event, it's quite an honor to share the stage with my dear friend Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a prominent Indian historian and writer, a top-ranking diplomat, a former member of the Indian government, now a distinguished member of the parliament, and I would like to add a global citizen who acts as a true bridge between India and the world, between India and France, and who stands among the best French speakers in India. Together, we will explore his relationship to French culture, language and literature before launching the new Malayalam translation of two of France's most celebrated women writers, testifying to the enduring engagement of DC Books to bringing Kerala to the world and the world to Kerala. So once again, thank you very much for organizing this event, and thank you very much to you, Shashi, to be here in a very hectic schedule from Delhi to Washington and of course to Trivandrum. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Joining His Excellency on stage is a renowned writer, scholar and cultural chronicler, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a global intellectual force, acclaimed author of many books, former UN Under-Secretary General and Member of Parliament, whose eloquent voice dissects history, culture and contemporary India with unparalleled insights. Together, they will be exploring the nuances of literature, translation and our shared heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Tharoor and Ambassador Mathou for this insightful dialogue.
Thank you very much, and it's such a pleasure to see Thierry Mathou and Madame Mathou here, and of course Gerard and all the others who stand for the wonderful majesty of France and French literature and French culture in our city, in our capital of Kerala. It's really with a deep joy and a sense of literary kinship that I'm joining this conversation with the ambassador. Amid shelves as I'm going to be bearing the words of Sartre and Victor Hugo and Annie Ernaux and others as we inaugurate the French bookshelf here at DC Books Trivandrum. Most unfortunate title, because pardon my French is an English expression for using bad words. So French, I want to assure you, is full of lovely words, and I would rather have had a different title for this bookshelf. But I know DC Books is a sanctuary of literature and reading in the city of discerning readers, and so it's wonderful that DC has made room for this in collaboration with the French Institute in India. And this is more than just cultural diplomacy, it's part of a timeless dialogue between our civilizations. Literature is both a bridge and a language of exchange. Across the sweep of history, the mingling of peoples, ideas and stories has been humanity's most enduring inheritance. No culture today is in any case pure, and we've always been in conversation with other cultures, sometimes gently, sometimes it's more tumultuous. To be human is to absorb, to listen and to be transformed. When we learn, we change. Victor Hugo famously said, "Every man who opens a school door closes a prison." The same is true of the doors opened by literature and books, which lets in lights where there were only shadows. We can no longer retreat to isolated islands of culture. The modern world is built on confluence, on shared imaginings, and few nations have contributed more luminously to that than France, not just through its revolutions and its republics, but through its remarkable literary and philosophical tradition. Whether it's the French Revolution, that marvelous upheaval that gave us three of the concepts in the preamble to our Constitution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. It's not just the role of France in law and governance and democracy, it's also torching and touching our souls, shaping our intellects, engaging our imagination through its literature. And to read French literature is to step into a world where beauty and pain and complexity all walk hand in hand. The moral complexity of Camus, the passion and compassion of Hugo, the subtle defiance of Colette, the psychological depth of Duras, the brave feminism of de Beauvoir. These are not just artistic achievements, they're guides to understanding the human condition. And what is astonishing is how this influence across oceans and language barriers found such fertile ground here in Kerala. 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, in fact, in a transformative act of literary vision, Nallapattu Narayana Menon translated Victor Hugo's Les Miserables into Malayalam as Pavangal. I'm sure many of you have read it in Malayalam. And it was not just a simple transference of words, it was a cultural transplantation. And the soil of Kerala received it not just with curiosity, but with gratitude and with some revolutionary fervor. Our famous communist leader, E.M.S. Namudripal, actually said that that Pavangal was one of the sparks that led him to become a communist. So I'm not sure that Victor Hugo might have intended such an outcome, but the very idea of encountering a literary hero like Jean Valjean, broken by systems, redeemed by compassion, awakened to justice, all of that lit the sort of flames of conscience in so many readers here. And many, many other Kerala writers like Takage Shivashankara Pillai or O.V. Vijayan have said that in the translated works of French writing, they found a new idiom of empathy, a new narrative possibility, a new lens through which to view the oppressed and the invisible. Sartre famously said, words are loaded pistols. The Malayalis grab the pistols quicker than they grab the words, I'm afraid. But the truth is, with Pavangal, Malayalam found a weapon not just of destruction but also of awakening. And that engagement partly contributed, I cannot give French literature the whole credit, but partly contributed to the decades of remarkable literary and social ferment in Kerala from the 1930s onwards. And we all know that many other Malayalis started translating French and Russian fiction and particularly modernist works into Malayalam, and that's how the doors of people like Maupassant, Victor Hugo, Emile Zola were open to Malayali minds, and that's how many Malayalis discovered the challenges of realism, of introspection, of a literature that mirrored society and questioned it. I'm not going to inflict a long speech on you, and I've come with a very long speech, not knowing what was expected this afternoon. I think it'll be more fun to be in conversation with the ambassador. But let me just say that the power of translation should not be underestimated, because if a 19th century French novel could move the conscience of so many 20th century Malayali readers, and thereby contribute to transforming politics, literature, and public morality, then you can imagine that in the 21st century, the relevance of subsequent French literature continues to be so absolutely essential. And I must say, though my time available for reading has shrunk in the course of my career, I have read enough of French writing, including in translation, to say that these are voices of fierce honesty, of challenging norms, of interrogating identities, of expanding empathy, and all you young Malayali readers, I think, will be richly rewarded, whether you read it in French or in Malayalam or in English. And I think DC Books has also English and Malayalam translations available. Certainly you will be much rewarded. And let me end by saying that in many ways the most truthful library is the one written in our own DNA, encoded in every mingling of our minds with other memories of language and love that other writers give us. To read is to tap into that inheritance, to meet ourselves through the eyes of another. So when we stand before the shelves of DC Books here, in the presence of so many curious readers and of course literary minds, I urge all of us to jump into that bookshelf of French books, open the books not to escape your world but to understand it more deeply. Read not to escape your identity, but to expand your identity. Encounter French literature not as something foreign, but as something familiar. A voice speaking from another shore of the same ocean. To quote Albert Camus, fiction is a lie through which we tell the truth. Let us tell those truths together. Through Sartre and Satrapi, through Ernaud and Narayana Menon, through DC Books and the French Institute. And once again, thank you to Thierry Mathou, the Ambassador of France and a very good friend, a scholar diplomat, whose life's work is itself a map of Asia's dialogue with Europe. And let me thank you all for being here, for being readers, believers, and torchbearers of literature in a world that really needs its light more than ever. Merci beaucoup. Nandi Vandayan Ellavarikkum. Thank you very much. Let the books speak for themselves now. Let the dialogue continue. Vive la littérature et vive l'amitié indo-française. All the best.
Thank you, sir. That was truly inspiring. So let's hear from the renowned personalities here, the insightful dialogues.
So thank you very much, dear Shashi, to be so eloquent. It's always an inspiration to listen to you. And thanks to DC Books to actually give me the opportunity for the first time in my career not to be interviewed, but to be the interviewer. And it's quite an honor to have this grand premiere with you, dear Shashi. So, you are considered clearly among the most erudite readers and writers in India today. I think you claim to have read a fair amount of the Upanishad. I believe it. But I know that you also read quite a few French classicals, lots of them actually. You started writing at the age of 6, I think, and got your first story published at the age of 10. You have more than 25 books to your credit, many of which actually have been translated in foreign languages and of course in French. As a matter of fact, I mean, you will see that we have a Pardon My French corner, but here we have a Pardon Shashi Tharoor corner also, so I invite you to, browse in it. So let's jump into my first question. Maybe could you tell us who was your first French authors you came across? And what did you think about the book you read? I mean, what kind of impression, feeling? Was it about values? Was it about what?
Well, I began, frankly, as a child reader, and therefore, for me, inevitably, it was works like The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, The Adventure, the story is what attracted me. The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, Antoine Saint-Exupéry discovered, had depths of meaning that I didn't get the first time I read the story, but which became apparent as one went on. There were also, of course, the short stories of Guy de Maupassant. Those were available in English translation, and I loved the short story form, and he was the master of it. And then, as I grew older, I began discovering more serious writers. I remember reading L'Étranger, The Stranger by Camus, which was a deeply unsettling work for a teenager to discover. More challengingly, Being and Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre. And amongst the more modern writers, I had the quite startling experience of reading Paria by Pascal Bruckner, which is set in India, and which involves a rather bizarre plot. And it was quite striking because decades later, I met Pascal Bruckner at the home of one of your predecessors at the French ambassador's residence in Delhi, when he had come visiting. So I've read a lot widely. I will say that one of the great things about French writing is the extraordinary range of it. Les Damnés de la Terre, The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon is a masterpiece of anti-colonial literature. That may not make all the French friends comfortable, but it's still an absolutely striking work. But if you want to read for the pleasure of reading, very difficult to get past the works of Victor Hugo, because not only Les Miserables, which I've talked about already, but there's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which really just had so much to offer us about the sort of deformed bell ringer in the Notre Dame Cathedral, and his love affair, or his love unrequited, for a compassionate and free-spirited gypsy called Esmeralda. All of this, and the description of the rigid hierarchies of medieval society, will ring a bell to all of us who've been resisting the rigid hierarchies of our society. The Phantom of the Opera, similarly, is another remarkable novel by a chap called Gaston Leroux. He's not so well known, but again, you take a majestic French monument, and you have a story again of a deformed figure falling in love with a beautiful singer, and again, what that tells, in many ways, the parallels between the two are quite striking. So a lot of these things, Thierry, I read, and to my mind, what is striking about them all is not only that the stories are so compelling, because for a young reader, the stories are what keep you turning the pages, but it's also the content, the fact that they force you to think. about larger issues behind the stories. That was a very distinctive feature of French writing.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned initially the Little Prince, because, well, we have a Little Prince here, it's translated in local language. I don't know for the audience, but Little Prince is the book in the world the most translated after the Bible. And there are different ways to read it, actually. Initially, when you see it, you think it's a children's book, and you can read it as a children's book. Then, of course, it's a philosophy book. And actually,
Meaning of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has become one of the French most famous classics. So, which leads me to ask you, what is your best French classic, actually?
I think it has to be The Little Prince. I mean, because the thing about Le Petit Prince, even the story of the story is amazing, because it's written by this guy in the middle of World War II. It's published in 1943. And he himself disappears in 1944. And in 1943, a year before his death, he is writing about the meaning of life and the meaning of friendships and the meaning of... So here you've got the story about a pilot stranded in the desert who meets a sort of child who's interrogating about this meaning of life, a cosmic figure. And it's in a story that in many ways is written that can enchant children, but it's full of meaning for adults because it reflects on human nature, on friendship, and on the search for purpose and meaning in life. And then he completes the book, Saint-Exupéry. He returns to fly missions for France in World War II, and during a reconnaissance flight in 1944, he just disappears. We still don't know where his plane crashed, where his body can ever be found, the skeleton. It's almost as if he flew into another world. Extraordinary, and the story of the author is almost as compelling as the book, but also the poetic storytelling, the philosophical insights into life and humanity are what make it an absolute classic. And it's here in the bookshelves. Get it.
One day I read a book, title was The Elephant, the Tiger and the Cell Phone. And at the end of the book I said, well, I would like to meet the author. Maybe I would have some chance. It happens to be here. And this is a question we often ask ourselves. I mean, when we read a book, maybe the next stage would be to meet the author and, I don't know, ask him or her questions about the clues. So, did you have this kind of feeling? And if the case, which author would like to meet, which French actor would like to meet, and what kind of question you would like to ask him or her?
Oh, I think that I can't give you just one. There are too many of them. Let's have a dinner party together, Thierry.
With good wines.
I'd love to invite Dumas. I'd love to invite Beauvoir. I mean, I must say, Simone de Beauvoir was quite a figure. When you think that she was writing before anybody else, really, about serious interrogations of gender stereotyping, women's role in society, and on top of that, her relationship with Sartre. I would not invite Sartre, only de Beauvoir. and who else? Hugo. I mean, Victor Hugo's impact on so many people in India has to be. I don't think the French fully realize it. It's not just the impact that Les Miserables had in Kerala and on the starting of the communist movement and everything else. Manmohan Singh, who would be the opposite end of the political spectrum, if you say, in a sense, on economics, when he was liberalizing the Indian economy, this historic speech in Parliament, he quoted Hugo again. No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. I mean, so Hugo has entered our conscience. I'd love to have him at the dinner as well.
That's right. You know, there is a French writer who visited this city in 1899, Pierre Loti.
1899?
Yeah, absolutely, Trivandrum. And he wrote a book, title is India Without the British. Oh. It's a very French title, as a matter of fact. And you know, sometimes when we ask about France, I kind of answers like, well, I like France without the French. Well, I don't know if it's the case anyway.
France is impossible to imagine without the French.
Obviously, you read books about France and in French or in English French books before going to France. So let's ask you, when you first went to Paris and to France, did your readings help you to better understand France and the French? Or?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question that one had to see Notre Dame and imagine imagine Quasimodo and Esmeralda. I mean, this is normal. This is human. One had to see the Bastille and imagine what happened in French history there. But you know, the thing about French culture is it keeps updating itself. So you know, you walk on the right bank and you have the majestic building of the Louvre, and you have the sort of great monuments on that side. And then you go across to the left bank, and you've got the Boulevard Saint-Germain, you've got the cafes, and I actually sat at the cafe, and people said, "Oh, Sartre used to sit at that table," and you know, you go to another place, and Bernard-Henri Lévy was there just last Sunday, you know, that day, having a coffee right where you're sitting. This kind of thing is wonderful about France. I'm sorry to say there really isn't an Indian equivalent, and I'm sad about that. One of the reasons Paris is my favorite city is precisely because the richness of culture is present in not just in every magnificent monument, building, church, cathedral, but also in every cafe, in every street corner bookshop, on the sidewalks. I mean, that is the sort of the local tabak who's selling you your newspapers. There is an omnipresence to culture and literature and reading and joy, which is very special. And given the lousy weather they have in France, thank God they've got this.
Great. When we read a book, I mean, when we get into the book, we fell in love with the story, with the characters, and well, as I said before, as we said before, I mean, sometimes we like to meet with the author to have a discussion about the meaning and the clues. And something also we are not so happy with the ending. We would like to change the ending. Is it something you would also to do with a French book? And if yes, which book you would like to change the ending?
I'm going to give you a contradictory answer. As a writer, I should first say truthfully that I think that the writer's work is sacrosanct, and one must never attempt to tamper with a writer's work, because the truth is that the writer's work has an integrity of his own. Even I don't feel I should tamper with a book I have already published, because it was true to the time of its conception, of its writing. And like producing a child, you can't produce a child and say, "Oh, I wish he had a different nose," or he was, you know, the child has to go out into the world. So to that degree, I have a sort of almost visceral objection to the idea of changing any end. And yet, as a reader, I couldn't help wishing that Camus' L'Étranger had ended differently. I mean, there's something so chilling, depressing about the complete absence of feeling on the part of Marceau, the fact that he, one wishes that some sort of crack of humanity had somehow entered his soul at some point. I don't know, I'll be very honest and say I had a very difficult relationship with Camus, because though it was easy to admire his intellect, and you know, the few essays that I read of his, not part of the novels, you can see what a fantastic mind the world lost in that car accident in 1953. But when you think of the novels, which is what he won the Nobel Prize for, I must say I'm deeply troubled. I'm probably at heart not an existentialist. I was never overwhelmingly convinced by Sartre either, but at least Sartre engaged with the world. Sartre, by taking the stand he did on the Vietnam War and so on, you had a feeling that at least this guy cared about things. With Camus, Marceau, you wonder, is this person devoid of human feeling? Is it possible for a human being to be like this? I don't know. I would love to have Camus come back to life and change the ending of that.
He was a diplomat, and as a diplomat we often ask ourselves how to develop the software, the soft power of our respective country, which is quite a difficult question to answer. Well, France used to have, I'd say used to have, because it's not always the case, very strong soft powers through ideas and literature. I mean, in some parts of the world, we always consider, for instance, that our literature had a great influence, Latin America. Well, now we are still thinking about what's the core of a French soft power. Well, if I ask you this question, is to which extent you have been influenced yourself by this kind of soft power, and have you been influenced by any French authors in the way you act, when you act as a diplomat, as a politician, as a thinker?
No, I mean, there's no question in my mind that I have been influenced by French culture and literature and reading and ideas and overall soft power. In fact, you know, the French were the first to really create the phenomenon of cultural diplomacy, because after the defeat to Prussia in the War of 1870, how did the French react? Another country would have found a different way to react, but the French are the French. They reacted by creating the Alliance Française to actually make French culture the strength of France. So you lose a war, and you don't say, we're going to build the strongest military, whatever's reaction. No, we're going to show what we're good at. We're going to create that. That's an amazing French idea. And the Alliance Française was the first such example in the world. Everything else, British Council, Goethe Institute, all that comes much later. The French were the first. This is the strength of France. I mean, culture is the greatest asset in France, and therefore the soft power of France has, and I still believe remains, Thierry, the most greatest appeal. Obviously, it's strongest in Francophone countries. So in countries where your culture can come across in your own language, it has an appeal, a resonance, a deep conviction that sadly we are losing today by speaking to each other in English. And I might add, we normally speak to each other in French. So here we are, for you to understand, we're speaking in a language which is already diluting the message. Sorry to say, but that's life. Having said that, the thing about France, I can't think of another culture where you can turn on the television at midnight and find four intellectuals engaged in an active, serious discussion on something truly important philosophically. That's France. I mean, I once anonymously, without putting my name to it, wrote an article in the Illustrated Weekly of India many, many decades ago. You won't find it easily, because I won't tell you what pseudonym I used. Speculating on what India might have been like if the French had defeated the British and colonized us. If we had to be colonized, why did we get the British, who are so unlike us, and not the French, who in many ways have cultural affinities with India, including in our great conversational habits, the habit of sitting around discussing over coffee, or the Bengali adda, or the Malayali at the chayakara. This is France, except that it's taking place in our languages. And I can just imagine how French culture would have been absorbed into our culture. There are small examples in places like Mahé and Pondicherry, but not really anymore, because I think apart from some superficial signs of it, including the uniforms of the police, the gendarmerie and so on, you don't really see any lingering traces of the culture that I would have expected to see, partially because these were very tiny enclaves surrounded in a vast ocean of something much larger than that. But France and French culture and French ideas have seeped into our consciousness through everything, through political writing, appreciation of the values of democracy, of liberalism, of liberty, equality, fraternity, all of that. The extraordinary contributions of French writers to opening up new ways of thinking. I talked about EMS saying that he discovered the passion for justice through Pavangal, Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. But you also find, of course, very many other French writers having an impact because they challenge you to think about the world differently. Existentialism really was a French idea. I mean, the great writers of existential literature are all French, really, Sartre, Camus, and so on. You've got to understand, similarly, as I said, Beauvoir wrote about feminism before anybody else in any other culture. So the ideas that have come from French writing, we should not forget. In many, many ways, even sort of popular fiction in France, translated into English and perhaps not as long-lived as someone like François Sagan, Bonjour, Tristesse, and so on, these love stories, which many young women that I knew when I was at university in Delhi used to read her and absolutely be enchanted, because there's something different about the way the French approach romance and love from the way that Emile Zimboum would in the English canon. So there's a great deal that we say. I will say to you very frankly that I benefited in a sense from being a very voracious reader, and so I would not claim to bear the stamp of one particular French writer or thinker. But the fact that I was able to read so many of them, and of course also read writers in other languages, the one advantage of the English language is that there's pretty much nothing that hasn't been translated into English from anywhere. So you can read French and Russian and German and Czech and Albanian and Latin American literature as well through English. And therefore the contention of all of that was rich and influential. Without the French input, I would have been impoverished. So it really was extremely, extremely valuable.
So thank you very much. So is the occasion to say, as I initially mentioned, that Shashi is speaking a perfect, fluent, academic, romantic French, quite impressive. And maybe actually next time we could do this in French at the Alliance Française. It's the occasion for me to say that, you know, we celebrate this year the 45th anniversary of what we call Alliance Française, our cultural and linguistic center here in Trivandrum, which was definitely the first foreign cultural center to be opened in this city. So we have 15 of them all across India. And well, it's a unique place where, of course, we teach French, we diffuse our culture. And you know, one of the reasons why we French are so proud of our language, and unfortunately we have to speak in English to address a larger audience. It's not so much because we love our language. Of course, we do love our language as you love your language. But it's because we think that diversity is the cradle of democracy. And when we speak a language, it's not only a way to express, it's a way to, well, lots of values, of feelings which come with the language itself. And I know that we share this vision. So as a matter of fact, most of your books have been translated in French. I think the first one was in 2002, it was a novel.
Oh, the first one was in 1993.
Oh,
Le Grand Roman Indien, the Great Indian.
Great. So, what's as you speak French, did you have the opportunity to interact with some of your French readers? And what kind of feeling? And did you read actually in French some of your books?
I did. In fact, it was slightly dismaying. Part of the problem is my writing, particularly the fiction, is somewhat playful with the English language, and so. Some of it turned out in the end to be untranslatable. So in the Grand Roman Indien, which is the Great Indian Novel, which is a satirical novel in English, the chapter titles, for example, were parodies of famous British books about India. So I had a chapter called The Bungle Book, which was obviously a reference to the Jungle Book. I had The Duel with the Crown as a reference to the jewel in the crown. And I similarly had a chapter called Him, which was a reference to Kipling's novel Kim. Unfortunately, the translator in French rendered that chapter heading as Louis, which meant him, but didn't have any literary connection to this. So, I mean, I don't blame her. I met the translator, Christian Bess, was a very experienced translator. But sometimes, I think the challenge of translation, the traduire, c'est trahir. To translate is to betray. You cannot ever be fully true to the original. And so after a while I stopped reading the translations, not because they were bad. These are highly experienced professional translators, and I had one of the best French publishing houses in Edition du Seuil, but because I felt that in some ways the language had to stand for itself. In other words, just as my books have all been translated mainly by DC Books into Malayalam, they have to work for a Malayali reader. And the language in which I'm writing has its own tone, its own nuances, its own assumptions, which may not necessarily be communicable in quite the same way within the conventions of another language or another culture. This can be really a challenge. I mean, the fact is that literature, when translated, doesn't just cross language barriers. In many ways, it has to traverse emotional, political, cultural landscapes as well. And that is a huge, huge challenge. It is said that perhaps the best translator into English in the history of translation is a man who translated Garcia Marquez. So much so that he actually was given by a number of Latin American publishing houses jointly an award for the greatest Latin American novelist writing in English. And that is The translator got that award because of how he managed to rise to the task of writing literature from literature as a translator, and that's never entirely easy. But I would argue, nonetheless, that there is a certain dialogue going on between languages, and translation is itself a form of dialogue, which enriches, I think, both the source and the receiving audience, because I have, as a writer, the opportunity to see my work through the eyes of others and through the voice and words of others. And in a sense, that means my book is having another life. The work has multiple lives in the different languages in which it appears. And since these novels have been translated also into Italian and Spanish and Polish and so on, I can't read. All I can say is good luck to them. I hope they work in those languages. But I think France is remarkable. I must say I was very proud when I went to say back in 91 or 92 when they had accepted my book for translation and publication. I noticed that all their Indian books in translation have been translated from English. They were all books written by Indian writers in English. And I said, why don't you do translations from Indian writers in Indian languages? Because very many of those will probably work beautifully in French, but the French readership will not know them. They'll only know something that's coming through the sensibility of English. And at that point they said, but how do we find out? Because, we can't read Malayalam or Bengali or Hindi or whatever, so how do we do it? And I said, well, nowadays the quality of translation in India is getting better. So try and read at least the English translation, and then you find someone who knows the original language. Because increasingly there are Indians in Paris now who are very fluent in their native Indian languages. And I'm pleased to say that my persuasion worked at that time, and so he agreed. And subsequently they published, I think the first year, 2 or 3 books translated from Malayalam, Bengali, Tamil. And then they decided this is working, and they've now got a regular series in their book of books of translations. And I think this is so important because now increasingly there is rich literature in India, written in Indian languages, other than English. English is also an Indian language, I must insist. But that which the world now has access to, because particularly French readers, because France values reading and books and culture, French readers are translating more and more of these. And now there's the Prix du meilleur livre étranger, which gives a prize to the best book translated into French from other languages. And some of those are indeed being claimed not just by Indian writers who have written in English, but by Indian writers who are writing in Kannada and Malayalam and so on. So there's still hope. But yes.
Great. Yes, absolutely. So as I said, we are very, very proud on the French side to speak French. You are very proud to speak Malayalam. As a matter of fact, the French Embassy, the French Institute, we do a lot to create bridges between the two languages. We are financing the translation of many books from French to Malayalam. I'm very happy also to say that during more than 30 years, the cultural attaché from the French Embassy was from this state. He's now a major author in Malayalam.
Mukundan.
Yes, absolutely. Back in the state. I'm also happy to say that my assistant she's a native. So she's from here.
She's a voter, even more important.
Absolutely. Well, she's a real ambassador, actually. Now, the question is, do you see some common points between French literature and Malayalam literature?
There's always common points you can find between any two literatures, but certainly I would say there's a lot we can talk about. In fact, if I were to recommend a Malayalam book to you, which I hope exists in French, Gerard, you can tell me if it exists or not, it would be by my father's late friend and somebody I didn't know when he was alive, O.V. Vijayan's The Legends of Khasak. Because he wrote it at the same time that Garcia Marquez was writing 100 Years of Solitude. And they both sort of invented magical realism together. Garcia Marquez became world famous and won a Nobel Prize. Vijayan is a hero in Kerala literature, but is essentially known elsewhere, unknown elsewhere. And in many ways, it's the same thing, the sort of brooding, magical, the merging of the fantastic and the real, the mystical and the present, the surreal, the mundane, and the miraculous. and it's an extraordinary novel about this teacher sent off to this remote village in a district in Malabar in Kerala, and how he really in many ways descends into philosophical unease, as it were, and goes through the kinds of magical transformations. Garcia Marquez is a much larger world. Vijayan's is a much smaller and focused world, but questions of identity, belonging, the supernatural would be something that I think would appeal to a French reader. So if it doesn't exist in French, that's one I would recommend. In fact, I'm sure I did recommend it as very much worth reading. I'd have to embarrass you a little bit, my dear friend Thierry, by saying that something like Fanon would have a lot of resonance here. Simply because the anti-colonial tradition is very strong in Kerala. Keralites were the first revolutionaries in this, along with the Bengalis. I don't want to quarrel between those two, but my sons have both genes in them, so they would fight with me if I didn't give Bengal due credit. But that revolutionary streak which is there, and Fanon is a product of French colonialism, who rebelled against it and wrote in French against colonialism, and did so very powerfully and effectively. So that again is something that I would have to acknowledge. I think even more important now is that France and Kerala are two places where literature is still thriving in ways that I fear it is less so in other places. I find increasingly the galloping advances of modern technology, the mobile phone, the siren seductions of the small screen, not to mention Nintendo and PlayStation and all the other distractions, and 300 channels on your television, plus endless number of cinemas and films and Netflix and so on. People are reading and writing less and less. And this is something which, as a writer, I'm painfully conscious of. Who reads anymore? Is the next generation reading? I meet young parents a lot who come to me and say, "Sir, my son is not reading, my daughter is not reading," but I don't meet those in Kerala. This is elsewhere. And in Kerala, not only are they reading, young people are writing. The number of young Malayali kids who come to me clutching books that often their parents have paid to publish, but in some cases have been published, who are 10, 11, 13, 15. It's mind-boggling. There's something deeply, a deep attachment to words and literature and books in Kerala culture, which I think only the French, of all the cultures, would fully appreciate and look. And I would say that in this world, literature is more important than ever, because it's a world of quick headlines and endless scrolling, where books ask us to look down, to slow down, to think deeply, to see the world through other people's eyes, to help us understand others and ourselves better. And I think what France has taught us is that you need literature not to escape, but to connect with what really matters. And both French writing and a lot of Kerala writing teaches empathy, curiosity, the complexities of life, about making sense of the world around you through your words, through your thoughts, through your experiences. And literature, I think both our cultures understand, shapes how we think, how we feel, and how we relate to the world. So in many, many ways, I think the beauty of words, the rhythm of sentences, the joy of language, these are things our two cultures have completely in common. And I think one thing we can all remember is that in many ways, stories built civilizations long before machines and computers ever did. And French civilization has been built on stories and ideas. And so I believe very much as Indian civilization, particularly its Kerala variant. We tell stories to each other and we build ideas with each other. And that is what we have in common with the French, and that's why I'm so delighted that Thierry Mathou is here, and that the DC Books bookshop in the flagship bookshop in the capital city of Kerala will now have a bookshelf of French books in translation. No French books in French, only in translation. We can get a few of those too. So that's the thing that I'm happiest about.
So thank you very much, dear Shashi. I mean, I have many other questions, but I see the clock is ticking. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, of course, for being here, but if you allow me to be who you are. Meaning an independent mind. And to some extent, well, I wouldn't say it's a product of French culture, but it's exactly what we have in mind when we talk about the French values. We often say, in French, we quote Voltaire. I'm not quite sure it's Voltaire who says so. Saying, I don't agree with what you say, but I will fight to death so you are able to say it. Well, usually I always agree with what you say. So once again, thank you very much for being such an independent mind and to be our friend and to be, as I said, one of the best bridges between India and the world, and in that case between India and France. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, merci bien.
For a captivating exchange, thank you so much for weaving such an intellectual insights. A heartfelt thank you. Now we approach the historic milestone, the launch of Malayalam translation of two literary gems, The Gospel of the New World by Maurice Condé and The Years by Annie Ernaux. These works reminds us that stories when shared across language becomes universal treasures. May I request Mr. Ravi, His Excellence Thierry Mathou and Dr. Shashi Tharoor to join near the stage for the photo launch. As our photographers capture this moment, let's celebrate the...
That's a good music, friend.
And there we have it, a new chapter for French literature in Kerala. Let's acknowledge this achievement with a round of applause.
If I may add, by the way, I was not embarrassed at all by your comments, because I think that colonial era is not a scar in the history of the relation between our two countries. And if you allow me, I would like to quote President Momo last year when she welcomed President Macron during the state dinner, said Pondicherry is still the bridge between France and India. So obviously it's not an issue between us.
No.
Thank you.
Now we invite His Excellency the ribbon and officially inaugurate the function.
We also have a tricolor, so it's the same thing.